A second SIM card fell out of her phone, small, silent, as if it had been waiting for me to notice all along. It happened so simply. So stupidly simple. I was setting her phone down on the kitchen counter, just a casual movement, something I'd done 100 times, when it slipped from my fingers. It hit the tiles with a brittle crack, sharp enough to make both of us flinch. She laughed, light and careless, like it was nothing. Like accidents didn't matter anymore. She bent down to pick it up, but my hand was faster. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was something deeper, some part of me that had been waiting for a crack, any crack, to open. The phone's case had split just a little at the corner. And from that small fracture, something slid out, not loudly, not dramatically. Just a sliver of plastic, no bigger than a fingernail. I caught it without thinking. It was a SIM card. Not ours. Not one I'd ever seen before. She didn't miss a beat. Just brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and said it was old, useless, her smile tugging at the corners like puppet strings pulled too tight. A performance practiced and polished. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But there was something cold in my hand. A tiny, silent thing, heavier than it had any right to be. A secret that weighed more than it should have. That night, I told myself it meant nothing. Old, useless? Just a leftover. People forget things. People move on. People change. Still, when I emptied my pockets before bed, I didn't throw it away. I placed the card carefully in my drawer, next to old receipts and broken keys, the kind of forgotten things you can't quite bear to discard. Just in case. I slept beside her that night, her breathing soft and steady, and stared up at the ceiling, feeling the space between us hum with a silence I didn't know how to name. It felt like standing on the edge of a fault line, listening to the ground whisper before it finally gave way. I told myself I wouldn't look. I told myself trust meant more than doubt. And yet, days passed. The SIM card sat there in the darkness of my drawer, accusing in its patience. I could almost feel it humming under my skin, a second heartbeat that didn't belong to me. I went about my days pretending not to notice. Breakfast, work, goodnight kisses, all wrapped in the gauze of a life I told myself was still real. But every time I closed the drawer, the silence thickened. Every time I turned out the light, the questions crawled back into the corners of the room. Trust means more than doubt. That's what I told myself. Until the doubt grew teeth. Late one night, when the house had settled into its soft breathing and even the clocks seemed reluctant to tick, I gave in. I found an old phone buried in the hall closet, dust-crusted along its screen, battery still clinging to life by some small stubborn mercy. The SIM card slid in like it had always belonged there. No welcome message. No setup screen. Just life. Conversations. Threads left open like wounds. Numbers without names. At first, I thought maybe it was nothing. Maybe old work contacts, a forgotten group chat, something harmless. Then I read them. I miss you. Be careful. I can't wait to see you again. Simple words. Ordinary words. Except ordinary words don't make your chest cave in. Ordinary words don't turn the room around you into a slow, tilting void. I stared at the screen until the text blurred, until the walls seemed to ripple with the weight of it. Beside me, she shifted in her sleep, sighing softly, a sound so familiar it almost hurt. I tried to tell myself it didn't mean what it obviously meant. That maybe there were explanations. That maybe. But lies don't live in the obvious. Lies live in the soft spaces, in speech, in laughter, in touch. If this small device could hide so much, what else had worn an innocent face while it gutted me quietly? The floor shifted under my life without a sound. And somehow I knew the fall had already started. I just hadn't hit the ground yet. The messages led to places and names I didn't recognize. And one I wasn't supposed to. I mapped them quietly. Each street address tucked between casual words. Each airport code hidden like a careless secret. It became a ritual, me against the invisible life unfolding in the soft blue glow of an old screen. London. Oslo. Zurich. Again and again. A name that once made her laugh, light and teasing. We'll go someday, she had said, kicking her feet up on the couch, her head resting on my lap. When work isn't so crazy. I never questioned it. Never thought someday could mean without me. The pieces didn't fit, but I forced them to. For a while. Until the attic. I wasn't even searching for anything sinister. Just an old travel adapter, something stupid and necessary. The attic was cramped and heavy with dust, boxes sagging under years of forgotten life. Near the back, shoved under a torn duffel bag and a cracked Christmas wreath, I found it, an ancient shoebox, split at the corners, breathing out the scent of old paper and neglect. Inside, a mess of cables, dead batteries, manuals for devices we hadn't owned in a decade. And something else. A leather envelope. Slim, polished, deliberate, too new for this graveyard of junk. My hands shook before I even understood why. Inside, photocopies of an ID card. Stark black and white. A face I knew by heart. But the name wasn't hers. Not the woman I married. Not the woman who laughed about Zurich. Not the woman whose ring still gleamed on the nightstand. A different name. A different life. The room spun slowly, a carousel of old memories grinding to a halt. Had I ever known her? Had I been loving a shadow stitched together from pieces she never intended me to see? My chest tightened, a slow collapse from the inside out like a building buckling under its own weight. Downstairs, the floor creaked, her footsteps, light and familiar. For a terrifying moment, I wondered if even the sound of her moving had been a lie. If the life I thought we shared had been nothing more than a set carefully built around me. Who had I come home to all these years? And what would I find if I kept digging? If I had been paying attention, I would have seen the signs long before the SIM card. It was buried in the second drawer of her vanity, under stray hair ties and cracked compacts, a relic abandoned without ceremony. The watch. The one I had saved for, scraped for, choosing late nights over comfort, overtime hours over sleep, just to see her smile when she opened the box. I picked it up. Its battery had died in silence. Dust clung to the ridges of the band, gathering in the tiny spaces like time itself had been trying to bury it. It was cold in my hand, heavier than I remembered. I could still hear her voice the day I gave it to her. I love it. I'll wear it every day. Words stitched with excitement. Tears shining in her eyes. Or had they? Looking back, I couldn't even be sure anymore. Maybe she did wear it once. Maybe twice. And then it slipped into the background, unnoticed, like a set piece forgotten after the final curtain call. That was her gift, really? Not loving, but performing love. Saying just enough. Smiling just right. And when the lights dimmed, when no one was watching, letting it all decay in the dark. I sat on the edge of our bed, the watch ticking silently in my palm, or rather, not ticking at all, and thought about all the small deaths I had ignored. The perfume bottles, dusty and half-used, meant for special nights that never came. The earrings she said she couldn't wait to wear, tucked away with their tags still attached. The canceled dinner reservations, the late nights at work, the way her laugh had changed, sharper, less full. Each one a fracture. Each one a tiny collapse I had stepped over without looking down. Trust, I realized, wasn't something you gave. It was something you built, piece by piece, out of tiny, deliberate blindnesses. It was choosing not to see the dust gathering on the gifts you gave. It was pretending not to notice when the voice you loved no longer said your name quite the same way. It was holding the weight of love even after it stopped moving. In my hand, the dead watch stared up at me, a monument to a devotion that had lived and died unnoticed. And I wondered, for the first time, how much of my life had been spent loving a ghost. I thought the fake name was the worst of it. I hadn't even glimpsed the real architecture yet. The deeper I dug, the more intricate it became. Not just a lie, an entire scaffolding of lies hidden behind the everyday noise of life. The false name wasn't some careless mistake, some slip of paperwork. It was deliberate. A company registered under that name, sleek, faceless, impossible to trace without the right keys. Bank accounts I couldn't access dotted across places I'd never even visited. And a property listing, an apartment overseas, all glass and marble, sterile and perfect, a place she had never once mentioned in a life she swore was built with me. I found it all sitting there, just beneath the surface. Like a second life breathing under our shared skin. And then, inevitably, him. The lover. His name surfaced in a passing message thread, a casual remark I had almost forgotten. Just a client, she had said, laughing over wine one night. Annoying but harmless. Harmless. The word clung to the back of my throat like a poison I hadn't realized I'd swallowed. How many other harmless things had I been fed, smiling, trusting, believing? At first, I tried to stay clinical, telling myself I was gathering information, not hurting myself further. But it didn't work. Truth has a way of bleeding through, no matter how tight you bind it. I started a journal, not out of anger, not even out of hope, but necessity. A cold ledger of facts. Dates. Bank names. Street addresses. Flight numbers. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't even sure I was looking for answers anymore. I just needed something real. Something solid enough to hold in my shaking hands. Proof that I hadn't imagined the hollowness swallowing my life. Proof that it had shape and weight and architecture, however crumbling and cruel it turned out to be. Every day I added new entries to the journal, carving a map of betrayal no one else would ever see. And with each page, the walls of our life, our paper castle, grew thinner. Every smile, every whispered promise, every quiet night spent tangled under the same roof. Just a story written on fragile paper waiting for the rain to come. And I could feel the first drops starting to fall. Then, without warning, she broke first, not to confess, but to cry. It happened without ceremony. No dramatic confrontation, no screaming match. Just a Thursday night after dinner, 2 plates still crusted with leftovers drying in the sink. She sat at the kitchen table, shoulders hunched, staring down at her phone like it had turned to ash in her hands. I watched her from the doorway unnoticed. The light above her buzzed faintly, throwing long, exhausted shadows across the tile. Her fingers tightened around the phone, white-knuckled. Her breath hitched, not loud, but enough. Enough for me to hear the first crack split across the mask she wore so effortlessly. And then she spoke. Not to me, not really. More like a confession she couldn't hold back any longer, even if she wasn't offering it to the right God. He stole everything. Her voice was brittle, like glass shattering in slow motion. I said nothing. I just watched. The way her face crumpled, raw and shaking. The way anger lit her words before regret could even catch up. She kept talking, each sentence another stone dropped into the quiet. The business she had built in secret gutted. The hidden accounts emptied. The apartment overseas sold off under her nose. Gone. All of it. Not by accident. Not by bad luck. By him, the man she had once laughed about over wine. The one who was harmless. Her grief wasn't soft. It wasn't apologetic. It was vicious, wounded, furious. Not at herself. At him. As if betrayal only mattered when it turned against her. I sat across from her, my coffee cooling into bitterness between my palms, and realized something so sharp it almost made me flinch. I didn't know this woman. Not really. Maybe I never had. I watched her crumble into grief that wasn't meant for me, a private grief, selfish and snarling, and for the first time since the fall began, I felt nothing. No instinct to reach across the table. No urge to offer comfort or ask questions or promise forgiveness. My hands stayed folded neatly in my lap. I let the silence stretch. Let her sit alone inside the wreckage she had built with someone else's dreams. And in that silence, a small, cold truth settled into place. Some people don't lose everything when the house burns down. Some people only lose the pieces they stole. She never confessed. Not really. And I never demanded it. In the days that followed, she hovered near me. A little too close. A little too soft. Like an injured animal sensing the tremor of an approaching storm, it could neither flee nor fight. She cooked meals she never used to cook. She asked about my day like she still lived inside it. She laughed at jokes she barely heard. It wasn't guilt. Not really. It was survival, stitching together small gestures to hide the gaping wound she didn't know how to close. She told me stories. Half-truths wrapped in careful pauses. A failed investment. A friend's betrayal. A cruel twist of bad luck she insisted she never saw coming. She left out the rest. The months of planning. The second name. The man she called harmless. Maybe she thought if she said less, I would imagine less. Maybe she believed the half-built bridge could carry the weight of both our silences. But the silence between her words screamed louder than any confession. There was no confrontation. No shouting. No weeping collapse at my feet. Only the slow, deliberate retreat of a man stepping backward out of a dream, not running, not falling, just realizing he had been asleep far too long. I stopped asking. She stopped pretending. The house, once filled with invisible performances, affectionate lies, staged smiles, became something colder. A stage abandoned after the play was done. The lights still buzzed overhead. The props still sat, gathering dust. But the actors had forgotten their lines. The audience had gone home. And I sat quietly in the darkened theater, not mourning the show's end, only wondering how I ever believed it had been real at all. Packing her things, I found one final piece of the puzzle. A letter she never meant for me to see. I agreed to her moving out without argument. There was no need for one. The real leaving had happened long before the suitcases appeared. The house filled with the quiet thud of boxes being folded, packed, taped shut. A soft funeral march for a life that had already ended. I packed for her. Because she lingered. Because she stood in doorways, touching the edges of things she no longer wanted but couldn't quite bear to abandon. T-shirts still smelling faintly of her perfume. A chipped mug from a vacation I now suspected she hadn't truly shared with me. Photographs too carefully posed to believe anymore. I made my way through her life methodically, wrapping memories in cheap newspaper, stacking moments into neat, forgettable tombs. And then, from a sagging stack of books, something fluttered out. Paper light, whispering across the floor. A letter, handwritten. not addressed to me. I didn't mean to read it, but my hands, or maybe something older, deeper, refused to let it go. The words curled across the page in ink I recognized too well. Her careful, artful handwriting, so practiced it could have been calligraphy. Farewell. Not to me, to him. In it, she spoke of freedom, of escape, of reinvention, as if love, our love, had been a cage, as if the years had been something to slip out of like an ill-fitting coat. There was no mention of me, no apology, no regret, only hunger for another life, another self. A life that never once included the man she used to kiss goodnight. I folded the letter back into the box with the same care I might offer to something toxic. Placed it gently atop the tangled clothes and cracked picture frames. Taped the box shut, sealing the past inside. Some ghosts, I realized, aren't meant to be understood. Some ghosts are only meant to be buried, quietly, carefully, so their whispers no longer find you in the night. I stacked the box with the others near the door, wiped the dust from my hands, and stepped back. There was nothing left here for either of us. Only the faint echo of a life we had both already abandoned, hers by choice, mine by slow, shattering degrees. Without her, the house didn't feel empty, felt finally devastatingly real. She left on a gray morning. No fanfare, no goodbye kiss pressed against a reluctant cheek, no lingering glance back through the rearview mirror. Just the low hum of an engine, the faint shudder of tires against wet asphalt, and the slow vanishing of her car down the curve of the street. I stood by the window and watched until even the dust she stirred up had settled. Then the house exhaled. Not metaphorically, not in the way we sometimes imagine. Physically breathed. The walls groaned softly, a long-held breath escaping at last. The floors shifted, the way old bones do when the burden is finally lifted. The silence that followed wasn't oppressive. It was cleansing, a soundless verdict. I wandered from room to room, barefoot on the cold wood, letting the quiet settle into my skin. The sofa sagged the way it always had. The kitchen counter bore its usual faint scars from dropped knives and forgotten keys. The vanity upstairs sat empty, a graveyard of abandoned powders and lipsticks hardened with age. Nothing had moved, nothing had changed, and yet, for the first time, everything was different. Without her laughter bouncing falsely off the walls, without her perfume sweetening the rot beneath, the house had shed its costume. It was no longer a stage built for performances I hadn't known were scripted. It was mine now, raw, flawed, silent. There were no illusions left to dust off, no careful sets to rearrange, no lines to memorize, just a house, creaking, wounded, real, waiting for something honest enough to fill it again. And for the first time in a long time, I let the emptiness settle without fear. It wasn't loneliness. It was truth. And though it hurt, it was the cleanest pain I had felt in years. I didn't lose her. I lost the illusion of her. And in doing so, I found myself. I don't hate her. Not anymore. Some days I don't even think about her. Not the way I thought I would. Not with rage. Not with grief. Just a dull echo, like a sound from a distant room I no longer bother to enter. But the man who believed in her, the man who bent his edges to fit into her perfect, breakable world, he's gone too. I buried him quietly, without ceremony, somewhere between the packed boxes and the empty drawers. A small, necessary death. In his place stands someone quieter, harder, less eager to be seen, less desperate to be understood. I learned, finally, that invisibility isn't the worst thing. It's not the fearsome exile I once thought it was. The worst thing is building your life around someone who was never really there. Someone who could vanish at any moment and leave you clinging to the scaffolding of your own denial. Now I move differently. Heavier. More rooted. Less willing to drift toward the warm glow of people who only know how to set fires and call it light. I am not waiting to be needed anymore. Not standing in doorways, hoping to be chosen. Not carving pieces of myself into smaller shapes to fit the hollow spaces someone else left behind. I am my own witness now. My own shelter. My own quiet, indestructible truth. And though the walls are bare and the house hums with a colder kind of silence, it is my silence. It hums in my blood. It anchors me. It says, you survived. It says, you're real. It says, begin again.